Okay, so there's been recent discussions about how we might be able to improve things within the governance of the CF conventions. The goals are to keep the conventions capable of changing and maintain the strong community involvement that we've had up till now, which has really contributed to the quality of the conventions themselves. And one of the pain points currently is that implementing changes can be slow. And I'm from the space industry. We're particularly slow. And so if we are wanting to be CF compliant, then generally we'll know what features we would need to have several years in advance. But nonetheless, if it takes then a year or two to implement those in the conventions, then we may not be able to make use of that baseline, even if it becomes available years before launch. So we would like to have the possibility, not the guarantee, that changes take place quickly, because in some cases, the slow changes are really beneficial and they contribute to the overall quality of things. But if something is obvious and everybody agrees about it, it would be nice if we could move more quickly. And it might also be useful for interfacing with other organizations such as WMO and CGMS, who want to have more clarity concerning how processes work within CF. So these are the main people who've contributed directly to the discussion. Also, there are people I'm not listing because they were hallway discussions or things on the phone or email, but didn't result in big changes to the proposal. And I'm hoping to gain some other opinionated people so that over the following months, as we refine this proposal, we can argue about it and thus reach a better result. Basically, the issues that we're trying to solve, I'm going to go through in a few minutes anyway. My feeling is that we have pretty well-defined governance processes, but defining them better would give more clarity and make it easier to distribute the work, and possibly easier to win participants to the discussion. Particularly, like in my case, I work at UMetSat, and my boss is always asking, how much will you be contributing to this community if you make this proposal? How much of your time are we giving away? And so if there was more information about how much time you could estimate for organizations that have very strict time accounting, that would be an asset. So I would like to see more clarity concerning roles, responsibilities of the roles, expectations on people who occupied those roles, and how these roles are filled. And an example that I won't go into in detail is an example of potential for improvement, in my opinion, is the way that proposals get implemented as updates to the CF conventions. I've interpreted the rules in this activity diagram, and I believe that my interpretation is not the same as everybody else's. Is the interpretation of the entire world, so there is some consensus here, but there are other ways to look at this process, and there are parts of the process that aren't really entirely clear. For example, the moderation, there have been separate but related discussions on GitHub and elsewhere about the roles of moderators and their duties and who they can be. And also when it comes to actually updating the standards document, there's some lack of clarity concerning who can actually press the button and who's required to take part in that. And a lot of this is not a high-level concern. It's mostly a question of implementing that in GitHub, which is why the implementation in GitHub is one of the topics that I think is really relevant for today. So the whole scope of what I'm proposing touches two main topics. That is the governance bodies themselves, and then the procedures for changing the conventions. And you can find the original proposal as a Google Doc that was circulated to the governance panel and subsequently to the CF metadata list under the link that's in the presentation. That link is now working, but I won't be continuing to use that for discussion or anything because I've now moved it into GitHub. The discussions had become complex enough that I think that it's worthwhile to have a pull request that we can point to so we can reconstruct the state at different times, refer to specific lines, and really record everybody's contribution. in the pull request and the issue. And that issue is linked here. What I would like to do today is to have an understanding of what's being proposed, collect priorities, and also opinions from people who are participating in the session today, and moving forward, find some people who are also interested in this, so that together we can refine the proposal and submit it for adoption or maybe rejection by the CF governance panel. And the way I phrase things is that the proposal can be adopted in whole and part, not at all. So I'm very open to changes or improvements to it. And a lot of the discussions that have taken place so far have resulted in what I believe are improvements to this proposal. So if we have time, and I think we will have time during the session, be forewarned, I've spent my time furiously typing on my computer because I'm refining the issue on GitHub. If I open that right now, basically I've identified some things that I consider unclear and or controversial, where I think it would be useful to collect input from the people who are participating, as long as we can make use of your time. I've made these into checkboxes. So later on, like I said, if we have time for this, then I'd like to divide up into different groups who are interested in the topics, the questions that are here, and it would be nice if people could check off if they're taking one, and then write into the comments what they propose as a solution to these questions. Some of them are also fairly straightforward yes/no questions, where I've proposed something and I'm not sure if that has buy-in from other people. And the output of that will be a more refined proposal again. So we're not voting on anything or making any decisions here. The decisions will affect how the proposal evolves and not what's implemented. Any questions or comments so far? Okay, also the people physically in the room are silent, so now I'm going to show you the gist, not the text, but the gist of what I proposed. So like I said, the proposal is divided up into basically two topics: the governance itself. Here you see a sad person poking a happy person. And you'll see the same thing on the next slide, which is concerning how things are implemented, but aren't necessarily related to, for example, governing bodies. So 4 points that could be improved. Number 1, it's hard to share the workload in the governance process. This is felt when moderators are sought. Number 2, it can be difficult to reach decisions. I think that this is mostly a matter of not knowing at what point a breakpoint is set in order to set a decision, and not the result of a lot of contention, but that may just be my impression. Number 3, duties not being very clearly specified, and number 4, difficulty in implementing projects. What do I mean by projects? Something that you would typically implement using a team with limited scope and duration. So for example, the migration to GitHub. Oftentimes you will need to reserve resources in terms of people and effort in order to make that happen, because it requires a lot of focused work, and after it's done, it's done. And so it would be useful, I think, to be able to solve those with more formal projects. Okay, so what am I proposing? Number 1, in order to make it easier to share the workload, I propose that we set lengths of terms for participation in any governing body. The governing bodies being, in practice, the governance panel, which currently has a sunset after 5 years of its membership, but this isn't implemented in practice, and the CF committee, which currently has no term in. So if you're in the CF committee, then you're committee member for life. So I'm proposing.
Actually, Daniel, I think it's the other way around, isn't it?
Okay, then I might, yes, that might be correct. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is this Jonathan talking?
Yes, hello.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for being here. Then if that's what you think, then I'm sure it's correct.
I can't see you, but maybe you can see me.
Yes, but you're not being shown simultaneously with the presentation. So
Well,
we can
that's
see
fine. The presentation is much more interesting.
I think you're pretty interesting. Okay, moving on. Gee, that really brought me out of my concept. Okay, so it's the other way around. The governance panel does not sunset, but the conventions committee does. And I would propose sunsetting all memberships, not with the intent of kicking people out, but with the intent of having them opt in to being members. Because it might be that you're a member, but you don't participate, and you might have even forgotten that you were a member sometime when you were working on your PhD 30 years ago. Okay, and then appointing or electing members via a known mechanism would also, in my opinion, be an improvement, although I think that there are known mechanisms that I wasn't aware of for all of the bodies. So how do people get into them? Basically by invitation. So then the question would be, one of the open questions I've written in the issue is, do we want to keep that way of doing things? And if so, then we should document it. And then something that can't be implemented purely by proposal is estimating the yearly effort that each role might be expected to invest. For that, we probably need more data, but it would be helpful for people who work for employers that are strict with that kind of thing. Okay, furthermore, I propose capping the number of people in any body, because if you get to a situation where you have to vote or you're discussing something, that can make things easier. I don't think that this has ever been an issue in the past, so this may not be important. But generally, if I'm setting up some kind of a committee, that's something that I'll look out for, and that's why I've put it into the proposal. And also ensure that processes are clear and seamless. Like I mentioned, the actual act of pressing the button in order to merge changes into the conventions is currently not documented for doing in GitHub. So I believe that documenting the processes would either make them clearer or show where the gaps are. I also propose clarifying the duties of each body's chair and secretary. In the proposal, this is implemented by one sentence for each. This comes from Jonathan: combine the conventions and standard name committees, which is in line with current practice, but formally they're two separate committees. And it would be useful, in my opinion, if each body owns its own documents. So the governance panel could own a constitution document, and the conventions committee would own the conventions themselves. And in order to implement big migrations, like going to GitHub or documenting all of these changes if we're going to implement them, it would be useful to have ad hoc project groups where known people would be named and would, of course, volunteers. We wouldn't force people to do this, but people who are interested in working on a thing would be named and given a given limited scope and a duration with which to complete a certain task. And these contributions would be recorded. That would make it, one, easier to justify to your employer because you would have a limited scope that you would be contributing to and a limited amount of time. And additionally, it might be beneficial to have a clear record of who was participating in such projects, because that could be good for them to be able to brag about. Here's another sad person poking a happy person. Number one, it would be nice to synchronize like what we're doing in this mission or in this meeting. So we're all talking to each other and we can collect a lot more feedback faster than if we were online. Two, clarifying the release frequency. Right now, I'm not sure when CF 1.8 will come out, but I know that there are changes that will come out in CF 1.8, so it'd be nice to be able to say when that would happen. Number three, where processes are unclear or have gaps, that could be improved. And number four, we don't have enough moderators available for all of the issues that we have. So how can we solve these? Well, having an annual meeting is a honking good idea, so I suggest we keep on doing that and document that as part of what we do. Number two, I propose tying the release of new versions of the standards to the annual meeting, because that gives everybody a chance to get talking and forces them all to think about the CF conventions one last time before a new version comes out. And to be really clear about what releases would contain, I would propose using a workflow similar to Git flow. And then for all the processes that we have, they should have a clear implementation in GitHub, because GitHub's our tool of choice. And again, my proposal is that each governance body is responsible for its own document tree. And so that would be, in my opinion, the best case would be one repository per body, but there might be reasons to split that across multiple repositories. That'd be fine as long as it's clear who owns what documents. And then if we were to do that, it would be beneficial to have a meta repository that unites them all via submodules, say. And then it would be good to clarify who can be a moderator when issues are discussed, and what their role is in that discussion. And also, I've written create process to ensure one is assigned in a given time. That means absolutely nothing, but the thought behind that is by clarifying what the roles are and what's expected of people in different roles, we might be able to get more buy-in from people with employers that are strict with time, which would allow us to implement something similar to a service level objective. So, okay, I'd like to make a project group that would address this with the tasks of migrating the original governance description into an ASCII doc. Jonathan, you've already done some of that, but as I understand, it's not a one-to-one transcription. Is that right?
I have done a one-to-one transcription, but I also did one which made some of your changes, but the latter one links the former one. So there's one called Constitution ADoc and another one called Constitution Original ADoc.
All right, excellent. Welcome to the project group, and thank you for solving the first task then. Yeah, that is a prerequisite for having a governance proposal that clearly shows the modifications to the governance document. So that was important to me. And then I've written, so complete the governance proposal and submit it as a pull request. Currently there is a pull request, but the purpose of the pull request is not to be pulled, it's to provide greater traceability. So at some point in that pull request, we would say, now this is an actual pull request, or maybe close it and make a new one, probably second one. And then if this is adopted, then we need to create or designate the root repository for all the CF documents, and create or designate a repository for each governing body, and document all of the implementation of the things that we have said we're going to do in each repository is contributing.md, and that would be basically the meta documentation for that repository. And then we'd have to actually do what we've said we will do. And I'd like to solve this within about 6 months. So I'm looking for people who are interested in helping put together this proposal. We collected some people yesterday. I've not forgotten who you are, so I'll be pinging you. Anybody else who is interested, you can find my contact details in the session, or just talk to me if you're here physically, and I'd be really, really happy, because I think the more people who are contributing to this discussion, the better outcome we will have. And if you disagree with things that I'm proposing, then it's even more important that we're talking, because I do think that we'll have a better result in that fashion. Okay, I'm about to give up the microphone. Any comments or questions or thoughts from those participating?
Hey, this is Klaus here from Sweden. I just wanted to add, I think is some great ideas to move things forward. I just wanted to say that from observing the traffic on the mailing list in the past, my impression is that often we reach like a 90% consensus on some issues, and then the thread kind of dies off, right? And it's just not pushed over this threshold. And in the new model, I think it would be really critical that these moderators have the ability to do this final push to say, right, we've arrived here, now let's hammer this down. And so I think when you move forward in this project group, it should be a really critical focus to think about how we can support the moderators. Maybe have something like a moderator education or moderator get together where you can discuss like what happened over the last 10 proposals, where did we move quickly enough and where did we lag in time. I think moderator education and moderator development will be very, very crucial.
Cool, thanks very much.
Could I make a couple more remarks, please?
Of course.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. As I've said, I agree with the aims, with your your hope to improve the workflow, and this is not a new problem, of course, but we should try and do something about it. So that I'm thoroughly in favour of that. I agree also with what Klaus has just said, and I'm sure many people think the same. The existing rules envisage that moderators would be important. The difficulty has been, as you pointed out, that people haven't often volunteered to be moderators. A discussion won't reach the end unless someone just pushes it along, typically, and that's moderators, and that's what moderators are for. So I feel as though that the current way we're set up, the role of the committee members should principally be to volunteer as moderators, or ask somebody else to do it, because it's important to have someone in place. So I agree with those remarks. A couple of other things. I would just, well, you've already said there is an existing document, but I'm not sure that whether anyone has read it, because of course it was rather buried, as you pointed out. It would be a good idea if people would look at it, because there's several of the points which are seen as problematic are addressed in there. It's just that well, it's not known that they were addressed in there, or the rules haven't been followed. And finally, I think we also have to remember that not everyone who contributes substantially to the development of the convention is a technically minded person, because it's a scientific convention, of course, and many people have contributed scientifically, and we must be careful not to put people off contributing their intellectual idea, making their intellectual input by putting in place systems which are technically quite challenging for those who are not really software engineers. That's it.
Yep, agreed. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, totally. I'm in strong support of essentially everything that's been talked about here. It's really just a matter of working out the details and answering some of the questions about, whether people sunset, whether, how we want that to work out. Sorry, Dave Blodgett, US Geological Survey. Something that I've always, so this particular topic of discussions petering out, and needing a strong, it's not just needing a moderator, it's needing a strong moderator that's willing to be, the devil's advocate, or the consensus builder, right? Which can be really hard. And we're not all suited to build that, especially if we're not technically minded. We may not feel that we have the right knowledge to build consensus. And I think it might be a flaw in the governance model to assume that conversations are going to come to conclusion in that way, that we're gonna magically converge on a solution, because that's not usually how these kinds of processes work. The other community I take part in a lot is OGC, and there's a long drawn out system for how to have conversations about finding consensus. But those always end with a motion. And a motion you can bring a motion and it can be voted down, right? There's no reason that you can say, no, we're not ready to vote on something, or that's not right, so we're not going to approve it. But anybody is able to bring a motion. If you're a member of the working group, you can bring a motion, and there's either consensus or not, and there's always discussion. But the point is that you're actually drawing a line in the sand, making a statement, and that goes into the the record, right? And I think there would be some value in introducing something like a motion. Many times they're just formalities because we all know that this is okay and we're going to go, right? Somebody says, you know, I'll bring the motion and I'll second and we move on. But other times the motion is the vehicle to elicit much more thought and much more engagement than you would ever get otherwise if it was just an ongoing conversation. So I don't think that's in what you've written up thus far, and I think that might be something to consider.
Yeah.
So
no, it's definitely been in my thoughts, but I haven't
Yeah.
focused on this moderator aspect. But I agree, we need some. I'd been mentally terming it a break point, but yeah, being able to bring a formal motion,
Yep.
formal motion, yeah, is a good mechanism.
Yeah, because many times the motion is actually the thing that people go look at.
Yeah.
And they realize, oh, I should have been taking part because that's something I care about. And the email I mean, personally, I can't keep track of all the email I get. None of us really can. And if the title of the discussion on the email chain doesn't draw you in, then you might just start muting that thread and it moves on to something you're interested in and you didn't realize, right? Or you didn't feel like you could take the time. But then a motion comes up and you're like, oh, okay, we should go with this. So, so anyways, that's just something to think about.
So another hand on this side, yeah. The old document. So the old document, I can show it so the people online also see it. If you go to the CF conventions website, actually, I think I may have noted where this document. No, okay, I didn't. So from the convention's website, if you look at governance, then there are two documents that are relevant, I believe. Yeah, no, one document. This is the rules for CF conventions changes, and that is what I implemented in that activity diagram, or described using the activity diagram. And then there's the CF governance document. And this is the actual document that has been the focus point of the discussion. And it's a lot more than simply a governance document. It's also kind of the status of CF at the time that it was written, which I believe you can find in the PDF version of the document. It's from 2003, if I remember correctly. 2006. And it was part of the inspiration, for example, for saying we should describe the roles more specifically and have estimates on how much time we would think people would be investing. Because already at that time, there was the concern that people wouldn't be donated essentially by their employers to work on CF. And this lives in GitHub as well. And now there's a transcription of that document, and you can find that in the associated pull request. So I will be working on the ASCII doc transcription that Jonathan has made, and that's this constitution.adoc.
So that's actually Appendix 2 of the document you've just been showing.
That's the source for confusion, because I was looking through it and thinking, where are the other parts? Okay.
Yes, it's the part that deals with the committees and their duties and how they are constituted.
Right. Okay. Good. Okay, well, I'm not wanting to run away from the podium, but actually I am wanting to run away from the podium and give it to Dave. So, not the case? Oh, okay. So now, okay, sorry about that. What I meant was Dave would certainly have really great inputs to this next part that we're going to start now, which is looking at things that I've identified as needing more input from the community.
Were there any other questions before or comments about governance?
I would back up what Dave said about the importance of moderation. Again, I'm sort of making a proposal which doesn't have to be made by a moderator, but I agree that the discussion should be finished. Has to be, in order to finish the discussion, someone has to clarify what the current proposal is. It doesn't mean to say that the end of the discussion has to be decided by vote. In general, we reach consensus because nobody has an objection to the current proposal. That's how things have generally finished. But reaching that point requires someone to state what the current proposal is.
Right, so that's kind of the motion that Dave was talking about, kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
having a proposal that is.
99% of the motion end in no objection to unanimous consent. Right.
So for those online, 99% of the motions have a known outcome and are adopted without.
Well, no, there's actually a formal. So instead of a vote, the person who's running the show, the moderator, right, actually just says, "Is there any objection to unanimous consent?" And if there is, there's further discussion until the person who's objected is shouted down, or or we say, well, okay, we're not ready to have this be a decision.
Okay, so you don't need somebody who jumps up and down and says, yes, I think this is a great idea. You
Many
are
times
looking.
you do.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's that Toyota management system where they search for objections and not permission too. Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so I think that is how we have always reached decisions in practice, although it's been rather slow. In the end, people withdraw their objections effectively, or they don't pursue them, or they are convinced by the arguments presented.
Right. Yeah, but I think occasionally up to now, the problem has been that this point has been reached, like on discussions on the mailing list, but then it hasn't led to an actual change so kind of the consensus was not really adopted into a change in the conventions.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes problematic. And I also want to say, now we've been talking a lot about basically the end of a proposal, and that's really important and good to reach a state where we can move forward more quickly with this. But I think a little bit of focus should also be given to the beginning of the proposal, because right now, just because you make a pull request on GitHub, for example, doesn't mean that anybody will care, right? So we need to have a kind of mechanism that pull requests or issues are quickly and reliably adopted. That doesn't mean that the person that adopts them has to be responsible for them forever. But somebody has to say, right, thanks for your contribution. We'll make sure that this gets into the process.
Right. So my question, I guess, is if you make it more formal in the sense that you have an up and down vote or a proposal or something, it feels more legit, as opposed to you send an email saying, I like to do this, and then by default, no one makes a comment on it, and then it gets proposed. It feels like no one answered your question, so it's not going to be taken, which is kind of how it happens a lot. I think a lot more with standard name tables, which is less severe of punishment if you get it wrong. But if you make this a more formal process, then I also wonder if you can get away from requiring a moderator by saying, if you propose it, you are the moderator for it. It's your responsibility to track the discussion to the point where you think you summarize the state, and then you do put out a motion. So you have this official thing at the end, which is your official summary of what is being proposed. And then you have the mechanism of saying yes or no, and we can say whether saying nothing is a yes or not. But it's easier than having to go through all the historical comments of it, and everybody then has their opinion on what that summary actually is. So I don't fully know what I'm voting on by saying no or yes. Or if you had the summary by somebody saying this is the actual thing we're voting on, it's easier for me to summarize it in my head real quick and say yes or no.
We have a distinction between enhancements and defects. So with defects, the rules say that they will be accepted unless someone objects. For enhancements, we have an additional rule, which is there because the additional rule is that there must be positive support from at least 2 members of the conventions committee. That's really the only role that it has in approval. And the reason for that is to give some guarantee that at least some other people have seriously considered it. To guard against the danger of someone proposing something which is a bit bizarre and their own private project, and nobody really be bothering to look at it. And then, if there were no additional guarantee, that proposer, might say, make a motion to, well, I'm going to accept my proposal. And if the rules were like for defects, then it would be accepted without anyone really having considered if that was necessary or a good idea.
Yeah, this is Rich Signal. I think I just want to follow on to kind of what Dave said, and I don't think we have to feel bad about unanimous consent being not a formal thing. I mean, Robert's Rules of Order, certainly contains that you ask if there's any objection, and if there's not, it passes by unanimous consent, right? So I think it's only when I'm just saying that I agree with the way you presented it, and actually our current process would work okay if somebody was actually there. There was a clear statement at the end, and somebody actually got to that point. So.
Just a little bit of a response to what you're saying.
So there's actually 3 people involved in writing a motion, moving the motion, seconding the motion, and then the person that wrote it can lead is there any objection to unanimous consent? No, I know, but I'm just illustrating the typical process that I've experienced where somebody writes a motion. It could be, and they actually can move it. Maybe they can't. But anyways, you ask the community who wants to move this motion. And then there's a second, and then is there any objection? And that ensures that you have sufficient buy-in, like you're saying, Jonathan. And I think this community kind of already does that to one extent or another, but formalizing it to some level feels contrived, but you kind of need that a little bit. So.
In what way could the pull requests act as formal motions? I mean, in principle, a pull request is exactly that. It really contains the changes that you want to make to the documents, right? So all the discussion that might happen in the pull request notwithstanding, if you look at files changed, that's what's being proposed. That's what will end up in the documents, right?
Yes, you could look at it that way. In my opinion, a pull request should be the subject of a motion, because then you know concretely what you're moving to put into the standard. On the other hand, there's also the use case of using a pull request simply for review of something. So I don't feel like pull requests, this may not be the consensus of the community, but my feeling is that a pull request doesn't necessarily need to be mature. It can be used as a way of adding making your discussion more concrete. And so having a pull request would still require some sort of a motion in my mind to say, okay, now I really want this pull request to be part of the standard.
So one thing I kind of want to point out is that this document is complicated, the standard itself. And so if we make the process to change the standard as complicated, you're going to lose users. Yeah. And I know that there are a number of users who are interested in CF who are not interested in pull requests because it's another level of complexity, because it's not their realm. They don't live in Git, but they might live in code, or they might live in using data. So it might be nice to make this as simple as you possibly can where it's still functional. And I think that's maybe where some of the rules of a governance thing just sets it out for people up front. This is how it works. It's a machine. You go through the process, and it's really simple, as opposed to having this is simple, do it this way. This is more complex, you do it this way. This is really complex, you do it this way. It's a barrier for people who are not at this meeting wanting to get involved.
Yeah. Well, I think putting the burden of making a pull request on the person who's proposing a change might be too much for some users. But I think it would be useful to have a pull request.
I guess that's maybe I haven't read the document yet, but I could say I want a relatively significant change to the process, to the document, without actually having to change the ASCII doc. That's okay. And then I assume that we would then divvy the work to somebody to actually change the ASCII doc through the formal process at some point, and then they would have to do that. That would be somebody's job to say that. Then once they change the ASCII doc and put it back into the pull request, then you could have the official vote. But you're not requiring every person who wants to make a change to a document modify an ASCII doc. That's another hurdle for them to get involved.
Right. There might be some mechanism where we say, okay, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable with working directly with the ASCII doc, then we export a Word file and they make the edits there. And then we reconvert that so that we can see the changes more easily. I think that would be a reasonable, and technically it would be a reasonable thing to do for people who don't feel comfortable with just working straight in the console, but not so complex that it would create an undue burden on people in the committee. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's not my job at the moment, so maybe it is a lot more work.
Word is more complicated than ASCII doc.
I agree.
And
but
I have zero time for pandering to people that don't want to learn new, simpler ways of doing business than what we do through our social arrangements in email. We take for granted how complicated the things we do every day are, and we should not be encoding that kind of nonsense in our governance processes.
I wouldn't make that part of like some kind of an official thing, but we could, I think it's reasonable to say, okay, if you don't want to use ASCII doc, we'll provide.
Right, no, it's if you have a good idea that you want to get into the spec, it's on you to find somebody to implement it.
Yeah,
and I mean, it's just, it really, seriously, there's so many things we do to get ourselves out the door in the morning that are more complicated than using GitHub, that it just, sorry, right? This is the way it is. So
no, I mean, that's my feeling also, but I do think that we could potentially lose people who might be making valuable contributions if we get so hard line about it. Now, back when I
we can also hold the community back in a formal way.
Okay, yeah, for those online, the argument was we could also hold the community back. Yeah. Okay, so we need refinement at this point because I think it's an important one.
I think one point here is that this could be also in the purview of the moderators to some degree. I mean, I think it's completely right to say it would be an undue burden on moderators that they suddenly are in the position to have to edit everything. But as a moderator, you could say something like, look, here's this nice tutorial on ASCII doc. We usually start doing that and just try editing it. And if you're having trouble with ASCII doc, you can ask me a question. I think that is something that moderators could do. But the other point is also often a change is preceded by discussion, right? And I wonder if it would make sense to do, as we do in some other projects, to start with actually an issue and not with a pull request, but with the issue where you can really informally say, right, guys, I'd like to change this generally in that idea. What do you think? Is this a good idea? Before you go through all the trouble of making a consistent change to the whole document.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that would also be maybe the point where somebody assumes responsibility, like some moderator or committee member or whatever assumes responsibility for pushing this thing forward until either it can be closed and denied or integrated into the documents.
Yeah,
I believe that
I
we
think
have, in fact,
both,
already.
actually.
Sorry, someone else.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
I believe we've already, in fact, decided or drawn up guidelines to do what Klaus has just described, the ones that Dave Blodgett drafted, that we can get. We start with an issue, as Klaus has just said, and we get as far as we can in the issue. Indeed, for some changes, people, I mean, particularly trivial changes, it may be perfectly fine, actually, even to make the decision in the issue without modifying the ASCII doc, because it's very straightforward. It's useful to modify the ASCII doc if there are changes all over the place. Okay, so now we're just looking at it, so I'll shut up. Thank you.
Hey, just a general comment on intolerance for things in general. I know that there's things that are easy for some, but to think that, oh, there's things that are easy for me, so everybody should be able to do it is generally I think that the openness that, you know, we should probably stick with that as a way of operating, and so that we have many different ways of getting things in there and not cast other people as being lazy or stupid. I think that's probably not the way to go.
Yeah, just this is Rich Signal again, and just weighing in on that. I mean, I would, you know, I feel like having all these different ways has been really confusing and has caused me to like lose energy in a lot of these discussions and just bail out. And if we were on just GitHub, using it the way I use it all the time for all the other projects that I'm associated with, I'd participate more.
Please don't take what I said to mean I'm trying to be exclusionary or anything like that. It's,
if you have a contribution to make to a community that works a certain way, that's wonderful, and the community will meet you where you are, and we absolutely will. But writing that kind of thing into a governance process, other than in the form of we will meet you where you are, it just saps energy from the process. And I've gone through a lot of projects now where I've got a diversity of technical expertise, and I'm happy to help people integrate their stuff into a technical document. But it can't be institutionalized that way, because we do need to encourage people to modernize the tools that they use to meet the community where the community is, right? And it's, yeah.
Just so like the issues versus actual pull requests, like sometimes you need both occasionally. A lot of times I have ideas and I just kind of want to ask like, hey, is this even something you're interested in? Am I crazy for thinking this? And sometimes you need to actually like, you know, pick apart a proposal to the text. And so like the starting point is going to be different depending on what kind of idea you have. And then like as far as kind of, I don't know how you're putting it, like, yeah. Some of the biggest pushback that I get to any of the things that are kind of, here's an idea is, well, that's not how we've always done it. And there's no, like, there's no arguments really other than like, this is how we've always done it, let's not change.
Well, yeah, that's never really a valid argument because it's not founded on a justification, in my opinion.
It happens a lot.
But I find here, you know, I mean, I'm fairly new to this community, and here I am proposing that we, you know, head all the members of the governance panel and create a new dictator for life, and that's going to be somebody, you know, that kind of thing. That is definitely not what I'm proposing. But, you know, this is not the thing I would have felt comfortable proposing to many other communities. So I find I have not heard we have to stick with this because this is the way we've always done things. Not in this context. I've heard it in many contexts, and normally I fight against that very strongly, but here that's not been the issue, and I'm very happy about that.
So I see it a little bit in the kind of like GitHub versus track versus mailing list. There's kind of like, well, we've always had a mailing list. Like, why do you want to? move to something else that is complicated and confusing. When for a lot of people here, it's not complicated and confusing. It's simpler than a mailing list. And I can understand that point of view.
Right. Although when I think about the discussions last year, there were also justifications for that too. So I mean,
yeah. So like
at least it wasn't. No, we've always had that, so we have to keep it that way.
So I'm remembering one of the numerous calendar / time discussions where it was happening on GitHub, and all of those comments were getting posted to the mailing list, and there was kind of this like, what's going on? Like, why are all these automated messages happening? And it didn't seem like there was this realization that people are having an actual discussion about a change to the document. And it was important for people on the mailing list to see that, even though those particular discussions get really noisy.
Well, I think, I mean, you're completely right, that happened, and that was unfortunate, but on the other hand, is exactly testimony to the flexibility that this community has shown, because somebody said, right, let's try out GitHub, and there are cool features there, and generally speaking, the community has run with it, and then there were some problems in moving over there, but I don't think we should hold this against anyone. Yeah.
So is it possible to propose a two-way approach? In other words, you say in the documents that if you propose your changes in a GitHub, there is a more likely chance that someone will find the moderator and people will pick it up and more process your request for changes quicker. If you take other option, then we may not find person who wants to moderate, or it may take more time. In other words, you don't exclude people off, but you just tell them outright that if you really want things to go quicker, use GitHub. If you, for whatever reason, you don't want it, or you're not familiar or whatever, throw your suggestions for change, but expect that maybe, people are not going to be enticed, to step in and moderate or some other things. Just basically tell them, faster lane and slower lane.
Or kind of doing a riff off of that, we could keep the mailing list, because I think the mailing list has a purpose also of just collecting feedback. Like, I want to encode data like this. Does this work? And then when we describe how we do proposals, because I'm with Rich on this one, I find it very confusing when you have too many entry points. So how do you do that? And if we have one central document that says this is how you get changes into the conventions if you need them, and it shows one process, I think that would be an asset. And then we could still, via the mailing list, tell somebody what you're actually asking about is a potential change to the convention. So see this document, and describes clearly how to do that.
Well, so we have already had a discussion about email lists, and there's a reason for moving away from the current email list, certainly. There was discussion on the mailing list about this, so hopefully everybody saw it, that we would have a separate repo, GitHub repo called Discuss, or CF Discuss, and and use the issues there, which is a different workflow for people initiating a conversation anyway. So, but that's kind of where we are now. We just haven't implemented it. So if
the only reason we've not implemented it is just technical. It's on the way. So we have in fact decided to stop the email list, except for a while, and still people stop using it, to echo what is said in GitHub, but it won't be possible to contribute via the email list anymore.
Right. So
that's
anyway,
cool. I think I didn't see the email.
So that's one of the gaps that we have. Okay, let's make a formal motion. I'm wondering if we should start talking about Git process flow, GitHub workflow a little more, which was the second topic. We didn't really have anything prepared. But Daniel has mentioned Git flow, or Git, is that what's called? Git flow?
Git flow. Yeah.
So that's when you use separate branches for the development. Master is where the current thing lives, and you have a branch for the next version, and And
For non-Gitty people, if you're not involved in maintaining the document and putting together releases, this would not actually touch you.
right, this is more about where a pull request gets, where it tries to get folded into, so it comes off of, or however you phrase that. But other than that, it doesn't affect anyone. It's more about which versions and when things get built and merged, and when the document, when one, say, so 1.8 right now would have its own branch, and when that would then get merged onto the master branch. So do we want to talk about that to some degree, or that hasn't, not a formal proposal yet, I guess, to use GitFlow, but I think it's kind of come up a few times. And I'm not sure if this is the place to talk about it in much detail or not. Any
Ethan,
opinions, thoughts?
Ethan, it's Mark Headley here. Could I come in for a moment?
What's that?
So
I'm quiet. Oh yeah, whoever's talking online, I'm sorry. We're having, we weren't hearing you very well.
Okay.
Oh, was that you, Mark?
My microphone. I will try and speak louder. Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yep. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So it's Mark Headley from the Met Office here. In terms of mechanics, how we use GitHub, I suspect that there's a fairly small subgroup of people who might talk about details of that. I think there's one thing that I'd want to guard against, which is if we start having to have multiple branches on a Git repository, we need to make sure that individual contributors don't have to have permission on the repository to contribute. So I'm reflecting back on some comments that were made by a couple of people early on about we need to make sure this is easy for individual people. And I think part of making it easy is making sure that somebody can click on the GitHub web interface, type in a few edit comments and press the button that says, please turn these comments into a pull request. And they don't get permissions issues or issues about which branch they're targeting or other complications that mean they'll look at it and think, I don't understand GitHub anymore. So it's a general comment that says that's what we should guard against. I think anything that we do in terms of technical details of how we manage the Git repository should reflect on those thought processes, keep the barrier to adoption as low as possible.
Yep.
Now I was, I can't show it because I'm not logged in here, I don't think, but I was really surprised, positively so, recently when I was looking at a repository from a computer where I didn't have an IDE or anything. And I opened up a file that I wanted to change. If I could make the things here go away.
Orange arrow.
Ah, thanks. So if I were logged in, I would be able to propose changes just right here, and it would generate a pull request and potentially also fork the repository specifically for that purpose. So this has become a lot easier in the last, I guess, the last months or something.
No, that's been there.
Okay, well, I wasn't aware of it. I guess probably because I'm more a command line guy. But that makes it quite easy. Then there's a question of how do we triage that? So it might be that somebody just makes a pull request and doesn't have it go into the right branch or something like that, but that's also easy to repair.
Well, so the typical pattern for public open source projects that want to accept a lot of pull requests is that there's a dirty master that is out at the bleeding edge. And then if there's a contribution that comes in that rightfully should go onto a branch, somebody on the project cuts a branch at the appropriate point in history and pushes it to the community repository. And then the pull request can be opened against that branch, right? That is probably what we would want to do, because practically speaking, the master is what everybody sees when they log into GitHub as the dev version of the spec, right? And unless we're going to change to another default branch, which I don't think makes any sense, that's practically what we would do. Then at some point in time, we would cut a version, and that would be the new release, right? And that point in time doesn't have, and you don't have to cut a version of everything that's on master. You can go back in time a little bit and cut a version that's slightly behind the head of the master branch, right?
We could set a tag at an arbitrary point in the
Exactly.
tree.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Branching is interesting, but practically for the kind of thing we're doing, not worth spending a lot of brain time on, because it's just going to get complicated and messy. So
I think a lot of this discussion now is flying over people's heads. Probably it's getting very technical, and I think maybe we should focus here a little bit more on the social and decision and committee aspects of this thing, and then hammer out a technical proposal that should include accessible recipes for non-programmers to follow to contribute.
That's exactly my point. The quote unquote master branch is the default thing when you log in. Pull down the branch master just so you see. That dialog will allow you to see the other branches that are in the repository, which should be cleaned up. And if you click tags, that's where you see the actual versions of the repository that have been cut, that are actually in this repository's history, right? Practically speaking, master is all we should be using. The fact that we have all those branches is indicative of a need to do some house cleaning. And we shouldn't be using branching for the core public repository.
Unless you don't want a dirty master. So I guess if we have a dirty master, then we need to make sure that on the website, what you see is the last release.
Because we're
rather than
not
the
doing
master
continuous
rendering.
delivery, I think we don't want to use that kind of model. So anyways.
I'm going to agree with Klaus and say this is too much for detail for the larger group. So let's take this offline and continue this discussion over lunch or over beers this evening. And we should form a group that wants to actually talk about this a little bit more and try to move something forward with a proposal and whatnot. So, okay.
I think we actually have a pretty good consensus.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. We have consensus. We just don't have it formally written down what we agree to. So we.
Right. I've been trying to capture on my phone some of the points for the discussion that are new or that haven't been discussed in the open so much before. And I think that a lot of these, so if nobody's jumping up and down and disagreeing with me about what I proposed, then a lot of these could be checked off. I just wanted to make it very clear what I consider might be controversial about the proposal. But my strategy would be to combine the proposal for the governance stock with also propose changes to the contributing.md if there are any necessary, so that it's all visible kind of at once. So the space sector Big Bang approach type of style, rather than doing it incrementally.
We'll find the contributing.md. I think it's probably going to be the .github. The second
Of which repo?
Of this one. It'll be the .github at the top there. Repo right there.
All right, here.
These decisions were made without people realizing it. The second sentence of issues and pull requests is the decision that we've been talking about.
Okay, yeah. No, I mean, I'm aware that this document has been evolving in parallel to I've been focused more on the governance process itself. So some of the stuff, I guess, is set forth here.
The second sentence, just close the participants panel. We can read it.
Oh God, what did I do?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Issues and pull requests. Here we go. All new pull requests. All right. Yeah, I mean, as long as we have clear guidelines. Good, good. So this is merged by a pull request that was reviewed by the community. So we already have a decision here.
Sorry, all those online, there was some discussion about what has already been agreed to and
I swear to God, we put this in the contributor.
So Dave's saying, yeah, we thought that was in there, and it is.
Okay, so we have 20 minutes left on this session and then a half-hour break. And then the next session will be going over kind of updates on a bunch of things. What else do we need to talk about right now?
Could I just
it seems
ask?
like we're in a good place. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's Martin Jukes. I just wanted to ask what happens after a pull request, because I noticed that if you go to the website, the latest draft was last updated in 2017. If you go to GitHub, the latest master version was updated in 2018, and there are quite a lot of things that have been added since the latest version on the website was updated.
Yes, I think that's something that kind of has been discussed a little bit. There was some discussion of maybe this was just in the committee and panel, but about permissions and who had permissions on the repo. And I think that is part of we have to decide the role for once the decision has been made, who can hit the merge button on a branch or a pull request if it's been discussed and agreed to.
Sorry. My question is, what happens after a pull request has been accepted? So I'm saying that
yes.
A lot of pull requests have been accepted, implemented, the master is updated, but the version on the website is not changed.
Okay, so why don't we have a 1.8 is basically the question.
No. Why is the latest draft on the website not the same as the master?
Oh, I see. The latest draft is not actually updated. So yes, that's another issue, is kind of the continuous integration and having some place for these documents to reside. So the current one and the latest, and make sure that when master gets updated, whenever master gets updated with a merge from a pull request, it should kick off a task that builds the current draft document and puts it on the website.
Who does this right now? Who's responsible for it at the moment?
I'm not sure. Well, that actual thing is, I think, so Jeff Repainter at Lawrence Livermore, I believe, has been doing or developed the process for the continuous integration stuff, but it's not continuous integration. It's not kicked off automatically, I don't think.
I think we get builds on every.
We could simplify it and just point to GitHub rather than have a latest version on the website.
That's true, but the links don't work as well. It's just not as clean of a copy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if it can be solved.
We could add a hook that automatically builds, right? Yeah, do some of this Travis
this
stuff.
does get automatically built, for example, but it's
not pushed
failing.
to the website.
Ah, okay, I see.
But we could easily have that pushed into the website repository, right? I mean, that's relatively straightforward.
Yeah, we just need to actually do that. Somebody is
For what
actually.
it's worth, I think the code was set up to do that, and what we're seeing is an error message saying that build has failed, therefore nothing has been pushed. I think this is a software issue. I think this was set up and was working, and it has broken. And the last
this broke 25 days ago across the whole thing, and I think it's this Ruby issue.
Okay.
Well, I don't think I know because I can see it. I just don't know how to fix it off the top of my head. The 2.2.1.2. Okay, so
this is something that we need to make happen. So that's another project group, working group. What
right. So so the terminology I proposed would be a project group, but yeah, I mean, could we have as an output of this session maybe a who should work on this and in what time? Because then we'd have something, because I've never met we before, you know?
Right. Or they.
Yeah, or they, or us. So I, for my part, volunteer to finish up the governance proposal whilst pinging everybody who's shown interest and trying to get their buy-in or not buy-in on it.
Okay, and I will ping a few people on the getting this working and any improvements that we need. So I'll do that. What was the other one? There was something else too. Oh, we have to move forward with the kind of the Git branch-y stuff and have an actual proposal that for where releases, or I don't know. Maybe we've already decided that, but
I think that
somebody
has
should
been in this contributing thing. So I think what I need to do is read the latest version of this because I had not until today.
Right. So maybe that's already kind of settled, and it's just the continuous integration steps that needs to happen because we already have the current development will be on master, and when we have reach some level, we'll tag or branch for 1.8. Okay, and so so a lot of it's just the continuous integration, having a version of the current draft available online.
So can I interpret the discussion that we've had today as a general endorsement of the high-level ideas of the proposal that I've described by the community? Or are we not that far? Because I'm going to do that unless somebody says I should not.
Probably you should ask who objects.
Yes, who objects?
So I'm not objecting, just going back to the additional question of moderators, since that is the big issue, trying to find somebody to spend the time to moderate. Would it be okay to then investigate my proposal of if you submit a change, you are the moderator of that change, to take away the requirement for somebody to spend a lot of time on it?
I really don't like that idea because I think it might happen that somebody proposes a change who is already steeped in the process and the community, and that could do the moderation. But in general, particularly with this idea of being open to everyone, basically, to propose changes, I think the moderators need a lot more experience and familiarity with the procedures to do their job effectively.
Well, one of the things that I suggest in the Daniel proposal is clearly define what is the job of the moderator, right? It's clear even from here that we don't know what is that. I personally think that the moderator should be the person not necessarily have a lot of hands-on, not necessarily writing reviews, not necessarily really putting a lot of effort, but just guarantee that is a fair and system is being followed. There is a civic discussion on that, and the rules are being followed, and really act when necessary to clarify the discussion group.
Yeah. Could I suggest that a good decision for this meeting would be to try and appoint a moderator for this task, because I think it is an important issue and also quite a complicated one. And it would be good if Dan had the support of a moderator.
So in the current rules, that would be somebody from the CF committee or a qualified person. Just a qualified person, I think. I don't know. That's one of the things that I have been annoyed by. Or yeah, so a member of the conventions committee or another suitably qualified person.
So as the person who largely pushed for the GitHub transition at Rich Signal's prompting, I work for Rich, just so you guys know. I'd be happy to be the moderator of that process because there's I wrote the changes to the existing contributing document, and like that was supposed to kind of be the official stance of the repository.
Right.
And we need to make sure this all fits together well. So,
Yes, I agree. I think that'd be cool if you would.
I can do the
I'd be
moderation.
happy with
I can't be a core contributor to the content because I've got so much going on, but I would like to continue to help focus the discussion. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. Does anybody think Dave is not another suitably qualified person? Or are you on the conventions committee?
Are there any objections to
yes.
that?
I have heard traditions of the repositories here.
I don't have any objection. Just a question to clarify, because you're talking about moderator, but also in your process, there's a lot of steps where human input is required, and so you really need to clarify the roles at each of these steps of those critical actors. Like, so obviously there are people who are allowed to lodge issues, and then others that are going to push pull requests. Others that are going to review the pull request before merging it. This is some work to review, and then of course merge the pull request. So yes. I don't know if that's in the scope of the responsibilities of the moderator, or is the moderator is just here to make sure that this is happening fine, but someone else is has these responsibilities.
So that's part of the. Well, so what's Daniel's role as the? He's not the moderator. He's kind of the champion and you know, author, right? Yeah. So that sounds like. I mean, that's definitely in your plans to kind of try to clarify roles and
right.
responsibilities. So.
Okay. Well, then the only thing that would remain for me would be to get to work.
Right.
Thanks.
All right.
We're going to get the
Should
Travis
we
code fixed.
define the moderators as the assignees?
One of, Dave says, but I didn't understand.
The role of the moderator is assignees is a question.
No, yeah, sorry. Maybe I can clarify. I just mean that how should the moderator show up on GitHub? I think he should be certainly an assignee, maybe the assignee of the pull request.
Yeah. So the author and the moderator, or yeah, are assignees.
This
yeah, author and moderator. That makes sense to me.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think that should be something. If it's not already documented here, then we can put that into the contributing.md to make it a little bit clearer. Okay. So everybody get ready for a wild ride, because I'm going to also be proposing restructuring the repositories. One pet peeve of mine is that the governance document is in a separate, I think it's in a separate, not the governance document, the conformance document. Yes, it's in a separate repository than the conventions themselves. So that would also be one of the things I would be proposing. Okay, but enough said. I think that's work for the future. Another question, what is CF2?
Oh, it might have been something about the netCDF, the enhanced data model of netCDF groups and extended stuff.
Okay.
Though that's pretty old.
Any statement about kind of versioning? Like, is this semantic versioning?
So the question was,
go ahead. Do we need to think about versioning and how we're versioning? Is this semantic versioning, or you know, so how do we move from minor, you know, right now it's 1 point whatever minor numbers. Do we need a smaller number, you know, a bug fix number or whatever the next one would be, or and when would a 2.0 come out? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, or like change some projects are going to database. Like this is the 2009 version.
Oh, date-based versioning, right?
There's a lot of options.
Right. And do we actually define how we version anywhere, or say that we will use.
Sorry, it seems like there was something important said, but us online people couldn't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was repeating it was just a question about versioning. Are we doing semantic versioning? Do we want to do date-based versioning, or is it written down anywhere? You know, how we version.
I don't think it is, but I think we should write it down. I also have strong feelings about versioning because I'm that kind of person.
All right, so is that something that would go into this?
That is something I would see as
part of
being
this.
in scope, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh.
My opinion, what's my opinion? Well, I'm not wanting to impose this, but my opinion is semantic versioning is the best way to go because then it makes it really clear what you can and can't use if you got a given setup. I've also worked in projects where you do things differently, but generally I like semantic versioning best, and it's really succinct and easy to understand.
How is that different than what we do right now?
What? No, can't tell you.
It's different in that it is very kind of defined, like as far as how you have to version when things break or don't break existing code, essentially. So if we add strings to CF, then like I believe the way semantic versioning would make you do it is that's now 2.0 because that is potentially breaking for a lot of things. Whereas if you say like we have a new attribute that most people will ignore and you don't need to read it for anything, like it has a specific scope and it doesn't use strings and it uses all the existing data structures, that makes it like a 1.8, like you increment the next version. And then if there's typos and just like minor corrections that don't change the meaning, that's like the next decimal point over. And so semantic versioning is just a way of, it's a policy, like we're going to follow this. And so when you can tell that my software will work with 1.7 point everything, whereas like there might be some new things that your software, it probably won't break your software in 1.8. So it's just kind of, it's a policy that we would follow.
All right.
Yeah, I support the idea. Also, with a comparison to what's happening now, if you look at the past versions, it's just really difficult to understand. Like there's this version 1.7.2, which is marked as obsolete, but the current one is 1.7. The 1.8 draft is 2 years old, but there's no idea when this will be released. And if you look at the even older versions, you will find that there is a bunch of stricken out text in version 1.5, but it was also already stricken out in 1.4. So what happened there? So I think having a consistent idea about what the versions are supposed to mean going forward is a great idea.
What Klaus has just described partly reflects the fact that we have, as you know, just migrated the maintenance of the document from docbook to ASCII doc. And when we did that, we removed the strikeout. The reason that was there was because we also changed the procedures. Previously, since the first version, changes were marked as provisional, but we had not adopted a procedure for making them non-provisional. So everything always remained provisional and the markup gradually accumulated.
All right. Any last comments? We're pretty much at time for this session. For those online, we will be on this same GoToMeeting for the next our sessions here. So it will remain open through the breaks. We're going to have a break now for half an hour. So we'll be back in half an hour and have some kind of updates or overviews of a number of current or already accepted or whatever proposals, and then some discussion about some of them, and I guess a few of them are kind of open and still moving forward, so there may be some discussion about that. And then the third session we'll have a few of those as well, I think basically kind of the newer ones or more discussions that have happened recently on the lists, and then kind of a wrap up. That's after lunch, so we'll have an hour or an hour and a half break after the next session. So I'm guessing not as many folks from Europe and UK will be online, but anyway, so and then we'll try to wrap up and capture all of the discussion or conclusions we've reached and present them then, and have some document for later too. So, okay, so we'll be back in a half an hour, unless there's a final comment on anything. No? Okay, good. See you in a half an hour. Thanks.